All right, if you're anything like me, you hate running out of food on a trip. It's like a big fear, and so I'm a big fan of snacks during an adventure, and one of my absolute favorite go-to snacks are Wonderful Pistachios. You may be familiar with pistachios and the brand Wonderful Pistachios, but if you're not, they are one of the highest protein nuts out there. 1 ounce serving of Wonderful Pistachios is 6 grams of protein. That's 10% of your daily value. It also includes 9 essential amino acids, and they come with a ton of different flavors, varieties. There's a spicy version, there's lightly salted, there's no salted, there's so many, and every time I go on an adventure, I'm not even lying, I take an entire bag with me. And what's cool too, I love having the Wonderful Pistachio in shell, because then that almost gives me something to do and focus on as I'm paddling or biking through the really monotonous parts of the adventure. Every great adventure is going to have plenty of boring moments, and it's nice to have something to do and also something that is giving you some fuel, like Wonderful Pistachios. So they're one of my favorite adventure snacks, favorite road trip snacks, and definitely leave me feeling better than a lot of other snacks you can turn to. So if you want to learn more about how to fuel your next adventure with Wonderful Pistachios, go to wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. Happy Tuesday, by the way. Yesterday was Memorial Day, so happy Memorial Day. Hope you celebrated. Hope you remembered those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for us. But that's why the episode's up a day later. But it's, like I always say, totally worth the wait. We're talking to Ryan Devlin. Ryan, you might recognize his name. You might recognize his voice or his name. He's a well-known actor. He's acted in a ton of things over the years, hosted a bunch of TV shows. But what you might not know, he's a lot of things. He's also an entrepreneur, I'm going to say avid rock climber. I'm not sure he'd describe himself. He's pretty humble about it, but he found rock climbing later in life by his own admission, but he fell in love with it, thought it was just the most incredible adventure sport activity, and just skyrocketed in the sport as far as understanding it and getting to know it, and also creating this platform to teach other people about climbing called the Struggle Climbing Show. And that show, Ryan talks to the world's biggest climbers. Like he's had basically everybody you can imagine as legends in the rock climbing world he's had on the show, and he started the show only a couple years ago. And what's so cool about his show and what leads to such insightful conversations is he talks to climbers about their struggles, their breakthroughs in training, their nutrition, their tactics, and their mental game. So it's a lot of topics that might not get covered in a strictly just climbing focus show. Ryan gets into some things that probably don't always get the chance to. And so he has so many incredible interviews. I encourage you to check it out. Great YouTube channel too. And so today's episode, I'm really talking to him about how he discovered the sport, his first day of climbing, which was super entertaining. Can't wait to hear that story. And also how he balances helping run a business. This Bar, if you've ever heard of that, it's this food company that does some amazing work with child hunger and solving so many issues larger than just, making money. And he also has started a school. He does so many things. He's got a lot that he balances, and he still acts. So the show definitely is something he does on the side. Someone with a lot of interests outside of my day job and outside of what I do on the show, I learned a lot from Ryan. I really enjoyed just hearing how he balances it all. And I'm sure a lot of y'all are in that same boat. You got a lot of, this life is really cool, and you're only limited to your energy, your time, and your money a lot of times. How do we pursue all these things and do it without, falling apart? So Ryan is a great example of that, in my opinion. So, and Ryan, thank you so much for being on the show. This was a treat. All right, let's jump in. Folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Mason. You heard a little bit about Ryan in the intro. By the way, I record that afterwards. Ryan, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm awesome, man. Cheers. It's great to be here.
Cheers.
Big fan of the show.
Really, cheers. Yeah. You got an athletic in hand. I've got a coffee, and it's 2:00 here on the East Coast, and I'm still cranking away on my caffeine. Where are you coming from today?
I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, so same time zone, but 2 o'clock is beer o'clock for me here, so I am enjoying myself in athletic right now.
That's awesome. So what is that home for you?
Yeah, Louisville's home. I kind of share my time sometimes on the West Coast as well, Los Angeles. That's where my wife and I lived for a very long time. But a handful of years ago, we moved to Louisville when we had our second kid, and a lot of families here. There's incredible rock climbing here. I grew up in Michigan, so it's got four seasons. It's kind of got the vibe that I loved growing up as a kid, and I wanted my kids to be exposed to. So I still love the West Coast. I still work out there sometimes, but Louisville is home base.
That's awesome. So what's the adventure outdoor scene like? I know a lot of climbing in that area, but were you tell us about that struggle too? Because I went through that too. West Coast, Mountain West. I'm like, are we really moving back east? And it was because we wanted a second kid and wanted to be closer to family. I'm not sure your reasons, but that was what it was for us. And for a while there, I struggled with that, but now I've come around and I'm like, this is the best thing we've ever done. What's that process been like for you?
I really love it, man. I love it for the adventure, and I love it for all the other reasons, like you just mentioned there, the family. And, you know, eh, look, living in Southern California was amazing. We lived in Santa Monica, so we were a bike ride from the beach. We were a couple hours from the mountains, the San Bernardinos. So there were days where I would, surf at sunrise and then get some, snowboarding in at sunset up in the mountains, or vice versa. Hard to beat that. And then just a handful of hours to get out to Joshua Tree and Talkeets and the Southern Sierras and a lot of the places I like to climb. That said, LA is a pretty big, expensive, congested, concrete, traffic jam. And growing up in Michigan and really loving green spaces and open woods to just kind of wander around in the childhood that I had, where it was, kind of free range, like a lot of us had from my generation, where it was just like, hey, be back before the streetlights are on. It was hard to try to capture that for our kids in LA. So we moved to Louisville, which is where my wife grew up and her family was here. And so built in childcare, lots of green space. We live, when we moved here, we lived right on the edge of a nature preserve that we would hike around and splash and get dirty. And then, the Red River Gorge is about an hour and a half, hour 45 away from Louisville here. So a little day trip, and it's world-class rock climbing. There's over 2,000, sport and traditional climbing routes. It's a gorge. It's like, picture the Grand Canyon, but like fill it with trees and waterfalls. It's lush, it's beautiful, it's nature, and it is absolute world-class rock climbing. So I feel like we kind of hit the jackpot over here in Kentucky.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I find the older I get, the more peace and quiet and kind of a little more just off the beaten path I'm looking for. And so many of those places just get, much less attention, relatively speaking. And it is just a treat every time you discover something like that. And, you know what you want now, especially with climbing. Well, when you had your acting career, and I know that was what you're well known for. You've been in tons of stuff. What were you doing to stay active? Were you weren't into climbing at that point? How did you discover climbing?
Yeah, it's a good point. The common refrain from climbers is, "Oh, I just wish I had started a little earlier." Because you develop a lot of this kind of strength, like especially the connective tissue, like your tendons, your ligaments, and these kinds of things, but also just like flexibility and upper body strength. A lot of that, if you start when you're really young, you just like maintain it, you retain it. Of course, I didn't. I didn't start climbing until I was 30, but I did remain active. And so, in Southern California, especially when I was acting on like consistently acting on TV shows, the schedule is a little unpredictable. You might have a string of 5 a.m. call times, and then you might switch to night shoots where you're going in at maybe 3 or 4 in the afternoon, but then shooting until 5 or 6 in the morning. It was pretty unpredictable. So like the gym scene wasn't really great for me. So what I ended up doing was just like a ton of hiking and a lot of biking and swimming and that kind of thing. We didn't live too far from the ocean, and there's great paved trails all along that. So I had a road bike that I would take out and just click off like 20 miles or something like that in the morning if I had like a reasonable call time, or if I worked early, I would just have to figure out things to do wherever we were, like on location. So there's a lot of like, just doing exercises in your trailer in between film setups and these kinds of things, just to try to maintain some fitness and get a little bit of that, a little bit of that like aerobic kind of endorphins going on a long day. Because, filming, you might have 12 to 15-hour days every day for a stretch if you're on a show that's fairly new and they're still figuring out their setups. And so
is a lot of that like waiting around and just letting them get set up and just kind of, okay, I got to wait until this is done.
it is, yeah. It's a lot of waiting around. Now, I did a series for a while on MTV for 5 years called "Are You the One?" that I hosted, and those we shot in super exotic locations. So the benefit of that, the waiting around, was like we shot for 3 seasons in Hawaii, 1 season in Dominican Republic, and one in Puerto Rico. So like the waiting around there wasn't so bad because I'd be like, well, I'm just gonna take like a 2-hour hike and go check out a waterfall. Or on Maui, there's this volcano, Haleakala, that's, you start at the top. I got a full downhill mountain bike rig and full armor. And I wasn't even supposed to do this because I was the host. And like, you're not supposed to like, do any sort of activities that could
put yourself in danger,
take you out of production. Yeah. Put yourself in danger, or like, mess up my face because my face needs to be on camera. And, but anyway, I was like, I can't not bomb down this volcano on a mountain bike. And so I got somebody to drop me off at the top and bomb down. And of course I totally ate shit and like wrecked myself. But I had a full face mask, helmet on. And so anyway, long story short, when you're shooting on location that's like exotic like that, you can find ways to stay fit and stay active much easier than like if you're stuck in Burbank in a trailer. So lots of surfing, lots of swimming, lots of biking, that kind of thing.
So talk to us about, I hear there's this story about your first day climbing. I had a friend that said, hey, you got to ask him about that. And I'm like, okay, there's all sorts of elements to it. There's rescue, there's puking. I want to hear this story. What was your intro into outdoor climbing?
Yeah, kind of epic, like the first time out.
And I see outdoor climbing. Were you used to like gym climbing at that point or anything, or just
a little bit, but like not much. I mean, I discovered like climbing again pretty late, like at 30 years old. In Santa Monica, there was a rock climbing gym not too far from my house, and I just popped in one day, kind of on a whim. Had always loved climbing, like the act of climbing, as a lot of kids do. And I just like instantly was hooked. It was moving meditation. I wasn't able. When you're like running on a treadmill, you can still think about work or stress or the audition that's coming up and all this. But as soon as I started climbing, it demands full focus and being fully in tune with your body. And so it was a release for me, not just physically, but also mentally. It was really just, exactly what I needed at that point in my life, and still do, for that matter. I recommend climbing to anybody who's like, yeah, exactly. Anybody who's like stressed out, or like, you can't turn off the hamster wheel in your brain, pop into your local rock climbing gym, because that hamster will stop spinning when you start climbing, and your dinosaur brain says don't fall, kind of like forces focus.
Is that what it is that what because I know with me mountain biking does that, just because the immense focus to not literally bust your ass all the time. But I'm not much of a climber, and so you never get that chance to check out, it sounds like, because it's a constant puzzle. So I guess, is that why? I don't know from experience, because I'm not much of a climber.
Yeah, well, I think it is for me, or any sort of sport that has a higher level of risk and uncertainty to it. I think just demands full engagement. And with full engagement, you cannot be wandering. And so for me, that's climbing. I think for a lot of people, it's climbing. It's not for everyone. Maybe you get too gripped and it's just not an enjoyable experience. But fear, like everything else, is something that is programmed into us through evolutionary psychology, and it's kept us alive for hundreds of thousands of years, fear of falling. But with, gradual and manageable exposure therapy, so just doing it like on a rope or with pads or in a really controlled environment like a gym, you start to recognize that fear that's there, that's programmed into us, but then note it and say, okay, well, I'm going to push past it. And so for me, that was like an immediate release. It was just like fireworks, the experience of climbing, but then that paled in comparison to getting outside. And so, yeah, it wasn't soon after I started climbing in the gym where some buddies of mine who were more experienced climbers than me and were skilled with trad climbing or traditional climbing. So that's where you're placing gear as you climb. There's no fixed gear in the walls. There's no bolts, that kind of thing. So you're placing your protection as you climb. and you're using ropes. Just for listeners who might be thinking about Alex Honnold, free soloing, El Cap, and this kind of thing. You're using ropes, you're using gear, but there's a level of risk. Gear pops, things break, rocks fall. So you have to be, you have to have your focus and you have to be responsible. So these guys invited me out. I trusted them, which is great. That's where you want to start when you get outside climbing. But man, like I didn't, I didn't know what I was in store for. We went out to this place out in Southern California called Talk Eats and Suicide Rocks. I should have known by the name already. I was like, I don't know, Suicide Rocks. That doesn't sound good. But you start with the approach, and so you've got a lot of hikers on the show here, and ultralight and fast and this kind of thing. But that's when you're carrying ropes and gear, there's nothing light about the approach. And this thing was a heinous, like super steep switchback. We got out there at like 4 a.m. because we're headlamps on. We wanted to have a full epic day, and yeah, I mean, we were probably a half hour into the approach and I'm already throwing up. I was just not prepared for, kind of the full adventure. You think about climbing, you're like, well, I'm just going to start at the bottom and climb up to the top. But, on a full like multi-pitch trad day like we were doing there, so that's 400-foot climb, 4 pitches, you have to bring a lot of stuff. You have to get there. And, I mean, it wasn't that hard. I just wasn't kind of prepared for it. So yeah, we started off like, throwing up the McDonald's hash browns that we had on the drive in, and then, had this full day of climbing, and it was just such a cool experience. And as you noted, there were things that went wrong and things that went right. And I'd be happy to talk about those. I don't know how much you want to dive into it, but, as first experiences go climbing outdoors, it was full value and it completely changed, my life in terms of like the sport that I'm passionate about and now doing the struggle climbing show about as well.
There's throwing up really being in over your head. What were you thinking this was, am I going to like this? Is this going to be a mistake or why am I out here? When did that flip switch? Was it there on the rock or was it, next day, next week? I know for a lot of us, it can vary when we're like, oh my God, this is my new thing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the difference between type 1 fun and type 2 fun is kind of the perspective that you have on it after the fact. This was a lot of type 1 fun. I was having a freaking blast. Even throwing up and hiking in, like it just feels good to challenge yourself and push outside of your comfort zone and be in nature, not just like nature adjacent or going, but like feel its kind of enormousness, if you will, and its enormity. It's yes, both words, oftentimes conflated, but I feel like for me, just being out in it just, I don't know, it just like every sense, every fiber was on fire. It's like how John Muir writes about hiking into Muir Valley for the first time. Every cell, every fiber of my being was tingling. That kind of thing that's what was happening. Now the climbing wasn't challenging, which is good. So when you're climbing, traditional climbing, typically you want to climb below your maximal level because there is some inherent risk. The climbing that I do out in the Red River Gorge predominantly is sport climbing. So there's bolts that are in the rock and you clip in to these, draws, quick draws as you climb. And if you fall, there's a bolt that's in the rock, like glued into the rock. It's not going to pull out. Now, if you're placing your own gear, maybe there's nuts or cams or these kinds of things, there is the possibility for poor placements or for the rock quality be not so good and a piece blows and this kind of thing. And in fact, like the first time I ever led on trad and placed my own gear, I got to the top. It was a climb out at Joshua Tree, and I got to the top and I was all psyched. And then my buddy followed up after me, and their job is to clean the gear as they climb. And he got to the top and he goes, "Hey, congrats on your first free solo. Every one of your pieces that you put in walked out." And walking out basically means like as I was climbing, the rope was swinging around and it basically like dislodged all of my pieces. That's how bad I was. So, had I taken a fall there, it would have been quite bad. So the result is you don't typically want to climb like at your limit when you're climbing on gear, unless you're a very experienced climber. Of course, people do that, and I've had them on the show, but not me. So the climbing on this 4 pitch, it was called Finger Trip. It's a 5.7. So relatively, not super easy, but, relatively manageable physical climbing for me. The climbing wasn't so hard that I couldn't enjoy it. And when you're doing four pitches like that, so I followed, so I was cleaning all the pitches, and what was really um, the maybe the most I don't know if alienating is the right word, but it was just like kind of the part of the experience that made me feel the most out of my kind of comfort zone was just being on these belays. So when I was belaying my buddy, I'm like on a ledge, or maybe I was hanging in my harness and he would go up and climb. Then I'd be by myself. So on the third pitch of this climb, so we're up 300 feet of 400 feet, and I'm on this hanging belay. So I'm sitting in my harness and I'm just like belaying him up the wall. And I'm just looking around, and you've got 300 feet of air underneath your butt, and he goes around a corner, so I can't even see him. And and then I hear this helicopter, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, there's a helicopter out here. I wonder what that's all about. Is there a rescue happening or whatever? I'm looking up, I'm looking around, I can't see it. When you hear a helicopter, you look up until I turn around and I look down and I see the helicopter coming up from right below me. And it was such a weird experience because when do you ever look down on a helicopter, you know?
Usually
I'm
not in
like,
a good situation.
yeah, exactly. Usually something's gone very wrong if you're looking down on a helicopter, or it's just like in an action film. And so here I am, like totally by myself on this hanging belay. My buddy's around the corner, and I'm looking down on these like rotors of this helicopter, and it comes up and it hovers parallel to me, maybe like, I don't know, 50 yards out or something. That's really close. And the door slides open. It's a rescue helicopter. The door slides open, and the crew's in there. They got their helmets on and all this, and they're giving me thumbs up, thumbs down. And so I give them a thumbs up, and I'm like, I assume they're looking for somebody who might be hurt or trapped or something, stuck. And so I give them a thumbs up, and they wave, and they peel off. And then I get the tug on the rope that it's my turn to climb, and I climb to the top, and then we get to the top and we rappel off, and rappelling is super heady. And like, I mean, it was just like the most full value experience. Then we get to the bottom of this thing, and we see the helicopter doing a rescue, and they lowered down like the rescuer on like this long slack line, they're like swinging back and forth and trying to grab this tree. And like we're just like watching this rescue happen, and they get this climber into a stretcher and fly them off.
What had happened? Did the climber fall or
Yeah, it was a fall. We found out after the fact it was a fall. They hurt their back. Apparently they were recovered and were fine, but like I think they became like kind of incapacitated a bit as a result of the fall. And what was so interesting, Mason, on the way out was, so after all of this, I'm like, oh my God, what a day. And then as we're hiking down, we're hiking past a crew of like kind of I'm assuming like low security prisoners, like a correction facility team in orange jumpsuits that are trained for mountain rescue. And so they formed a chain gang on this, because remember the 45-minute, puke fest that I had climbing up to get to like when you have somebody in a stretcher, it's hard to then get them down walking. It would be very bumpy, and it could be injurious if they've got like a spinal cord injury or whatever. So this like correctional facility team formed this chain on the trail, and we're just passing this climber down the trail in the stretcher. And it was like beautiful and just so wild. And it was like such an interesting experience and sight to see how kind of the climbing community comes together, and just the experience of being out there and the things that could go wrong and the things that went right. And man, I was hooked. I was like, holy shit, this is my first time climbing. Like, this is what climbing is like, sign me up. Hopefully not for the injuries, but like just for the experience. Like, this was just one day, it was just like a 12-hour period of my life, and it completely changed the way that I essentially like the way that I live now, not just the way that I recreate, but like the way that I am as a person. So yeah, anyway, that was my first day out.
what a day. And I'd never heard of that concept, prisoner trained like mountain rescue, search and rescue. On one hand, it's amazing. The other hand, it's like you're teaching the perfect like escape skills to like escape from the mountains. No, it's like what a cool experience to be able to get out and use those skills. And I search it, and I don't see anything about it hardly. And so what I always talk about on the show is you think you're going into experience, and you can almost pre-plan what your memories are going to be. Like, okay, I'm going to enjoy being up there. I'm going to be fearful of the height or whatever. But the stories that you leave with are this weird combination of variables you could never imagine coming together. And so I mean, in a million years, you couldn't have thought of that situation being what you
Right.
remember so vividly about that day. Yet that's what sticks out. And so I tell people, like, adventure really is just this framework for these really random situations. But it's those situations that you end up loving, but you could also never plan on happening. You just have to go do the thing. So that's amazing that your first day you experienced that so vividly and so strongly. Like, what a random situation.
Yeah, totally. Just and I've heard you talk about that before and say it like as this framework. And I'd never really thought about that until, I've been listening to the show, of course, and the interviews that you have are totally disparate. I mean, they're on all ends of the spectrum and different types of adventurers and people who do it for 10 months at a time and people who, you just had like revisited like the Beat Monday guys and where it's just like, let me see what I can do in 48 hours. But like how rad that yes, this framework, it's this framework that regardless of kind of the adventure that you're going on, big, small, right out your back door or like an epic, you are kind of creating these frameworks, this lens, this perspective on your life past and then going forward. And that's like what that day did for me. It was like it helped me shape how I wanted to adventure, but also just the experiences I wanted to have going forward. And then looking back now, totally like look what that day provided for me. Like the joy, the smiles, the stories, never could have predicted, probably a moment of that. And, even the puking was fun in retrospect.
It's always fun looking back.
That's right.
So, you coming from your background of acting and seeing this like literally like an action movie and happening in front of you, what was your trajectory in the sport from that point on? Was it because climbing does seem to be one of those things that can really grab you? There's certain sports where the folks that are passionate are almost, it's a little extra passionate than you see in other things, even like road biking. Yeah, people can do it. And climbing just seems to like take over people's life. Some other ones, I can surfing
Totally.
does that for a lot of surfers I see. It just becomes so much of who they are. Was that your trajectory as well, or did it was a little more of a slow burn with everything else you had going on in life? Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. Are you looking to sell anything at all online? Well, I would advise you to look into Shopify. They are a global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. I use Shopify every day at my day job. It has been with us since our company was a tiny little team all the way up to where we are today, one of the biggest breweries in the country. Whether you're auctioning off autographed apparel, selling sleek skis, or selling non-alcoholic beer like we are at Athletic Brewing, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their personal POS system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify has got you covered. We manage a podcast, a blog, all that right there on our Shopify store. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. It has extensive help resources for whenever you're dealing with an obstacle. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ASP, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ASP for Adventure Sports Podcast now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/ASP. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode.
Yeah, it was a slow burn, I think, but I think you're absolutely right in kind of categorizing climbing as that. Like people go down the rabbit hole for sure. There's memes that go around that were like, oh, I used to have a friend, but he got into climbing. Like it's just like, there they go. I feel like triathletes are kind of like that. Yeah, it was a little slower, and I think, partly out of necessity because I was working so much as an actor. When I got into it, we didn't have our son yet, but it was a couple of years later, and like that obviously had a really big impact on just like schedule and availability and risk tolerance and these kinds of things. Although I did go on some of like my most epic adventures, as a father and continue to. but I would say it grabbed me more. Like now I'm fully down the rabbit hole, dude. And like I think that happened when I got into performance climbing. So now that I live in Kentucky and I host the Struggle Climbing Show, and that's, a podcast that's also on YouTube. And so I get to meet and talk with, but then also get out and climb with a lot of the climbers that I have on the show, some of the biggest names in the sport. So Alex Honnold, I think probably the most famous one, but
Oh yeah, Alex Honnold, Tommy Caldwell, Beth Roden you just had on. Yeah, I mean so many.
exactly. Yeah. And, Alex Magos is another really big name. He's this, one of the strongest climbers in the world. He's German, but, he was out here at the Red River Gorge and we got to hang out and climb. And so I've gotten to having not only interacted, but then getting to climb with these athletes. It's a rare thing because, if you're really into basketball, it's not like you get to just go out and like shoot hoops with LeBron James or whatever. But like climbing is small enough and accessible enough still where you could go to the crag and not even know these people, like not know but then see them and then just climb, not if not with them, like next to them and talk to them and say hi. And I don't know, it's like my dad used to tell me stories growing up in Detroit where he would be out mowing his lawn as a kid and then he would see like a famous Detroit Tiger mowing their lawn because it was so early in the sport that nobody was behind the gated communities yet. And climbing is that still. It's still, kind of a dirt baggy, sport. There isn't a whole lot of money in it. And so for me, it was when I got to not just meet these people and talk to them as a weekend warrior and as somebody who's passionate about climbing, that like kind of sucked me in further. But then also as I got like a little bit more obsessed with performance, I'm in my mid 40s. Maybe it's like my wife calls it like the healthiest midlife crisis ever. Like I'm just like really psyched on trying to push myself to my absolute limit right now. And so I'm climbing harder and I'm in the best shape that I've ever been in my entire life. Even when I was playing hockey in college and these kinds of things, or when I was, acting and needed to look really good to be on camera and all that, I'm way, way more fit now than I've ever been. And it's just because like I just want to go out and like climb really rad stuff. And the struggle has helped me to tap into that, through the athlete interviews that I'm having. But it's also just like, you know, I think it's common. You mentioned triathletes and this kind of thing, or like through hikers. Like when you get psyched on something, you're just willing to sacrifice for it. And that's the stage that I'm in right now.
There's a big theme of our show. It's becoming bigger is, giving back eventually through adventure, like whether that's inviting people and teaching them these skills and not just making it all about your achievements. One way is to make this build a platform to make the information shareable like you're doing with the podcast.
Mhm.
But a lot of those people don't feel they have the confidence or the accolades to do that until later in their career. I felt that way with my podcast. My new show, Florida Uncut, is about conservation, and I'm a newbie, so I'm almost learning. But as I'm learning, I'm sharing immediately what I learn. Where were you in that process on that spectrum with starting the Struggle Climbing Show? Were you still new, or were you feeling like, okay, I've got to learn this and then teach it immediately? Where were you with that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think maybe that's why the show's taken off is kind of, I was in this and still am in this sweet spot of knowing enough about the sport and being experienced enough in the sport where I can speak with some level of, acumen on it with the athletes that I'm talking to, but being enough of a noob, if you will, like a weekend warrior, where it's very relatable. So if you're brand new to climbing, you can tune into the Struggle Climbing Show and learn a lot. Like every episode, I break into these chapters. So it's training, nutrition, tactics, mental game, and purpose. Every athlete episode, every athlete I talk to follows that. I have some other episodes as well that are like deep dives into like certain topics, but twice a month I talk to one of the biggest rock climbers in the world. And then we talk about training, nutrition, tactics, mental game, and then purpose. And so if you're new to the sport or you've been doing it for 15 years, you can dip into that training chapter and learn something from what the pro has learned. And of course, we always enter through the lens of struggle. So I always ask him like, where, Alex Honnold, where have you struggled with your training? And so it's kind of double relatable, I think, because you're seeing these people that you've kind of maybe put on a pedestal that you assume don't have struggles. Everything must come easy to them. Actually sharing about where they struggle. Alex Honnold says that he's weak compared to his peers. Like he gets by with technique and with mental game, but he's not nearly as strong. And so, when I talk with him about training, he talks about how he's training to get stronger fingers. Well, you know what? My fingers are freaking weak because I didn't start climbing until I was 30. So I learned a lot having that conversation with him, and people who tune in, whether you're a beginner or a more advanced climber, I think can relate as well. So yeah, I don't know. It wasn't by design. I think I just kind of got hyped and then had like this opportunity in my schedule and my professional background as a host and that kind of thing to pull this show together. And I wanted the format so that people could dip in and get the things that they wanted without having to go through 3 hours of fluff. And I also wanted it to straddle this relatability between, a pro and a weekend warrior, which is me. And so I think, for whatever, kind of however it sparked, people now, I think, experience a lot of the show kind of through my eyes and my struggles on my own projects that I'm working on the rock. And then get obviously a ton of like really actionable information from the guests. So yeah, I think it strikes a cool tone, and I'm still learning. Every interview I do, I'm just learning so much. It's really awesome.
Why is struggle such a big part of it? Why did you feel like that needed to be not only, a big part of the conversations, but actually like the title of the show? Why struggle versus, any other topic to focus on?
Yeah, I think because there's something that's incredibly connective, incredibly relatable with the concept of struggle. Like as soon as you recognize that we're all struggling just at our own levels, there's like some sort of kind of magic that happens. When I see Jonathan Segrist or Emily Harrington or Lynn Hill, one of the greatest rock climbers of all time, talk about how she struggles with a fear of falling. So I'm talking to one of the greatest rock climbers of all time, Lynn Hill. She climbed the nose, first human, male or female, to climb the nose of El Cap, to free climb the nose of El Cap. And then she also was the first to do it in a day, so less than 24 hours, 3,000 feet of El Cap granite. It still hasn't been repeated that many times. And, I talked to her and she talks about a fear of falling. I'm like, wow, that kind of demystifies things a little bit for me, like that makes me feel a little better because I'm scared to fall. I've got a huge fear of falling that I've, worked through for years. And I think one of the things that like social media culture and some of the other podcasts and things tend to do, whether it's by design or just kind of by default, is that we highlight the easy wins or the big victories or the green check marks in our sport. When somebody sends something, they post a green check mark and they're like, I sent this thing. But then we don't see everything that goes into it. And all the stuff that goes into it is really what makes the experience worthwhile. That's the framework, right? As you talk about. So I like kind of there's just something disarming about it. Let's talk about struggle first, Alex Honnold. Where have you struggled? And then let's talk about where you excel. Let's talk about where you're a freak, where, you've got a kind of a superpower. And I think for me at least, and for a lot of the listeners, I think that's resonated well and has allowed us to connect with these athletes in a way that maybe we won't typically do if they're just out there kind of talking about all the things that they've done.
That's really interesting. It's really disarming, like you said, to start, and then that probably leads to a much more fruitful conversation over the course of the hour and a half that you talk. It's because I find it often takes time to get into a conversation where like the real meat is right in the middle, 20 to 45 minutes ish. And then the end, you're kind of sharing links that you can listen to them more, or
right.
Where to find me and all that. But, you're almost fast tracking that process to where we're like, let's get right into it. And then, that probably leads to more of an average, really, really deep conversation. That's really cool. That's interesting. I know you've talked a lot about what you struggle with climbing on the show. What do you struggle with running this platform, this podcast? I mean, I don't know. Let's talk shop a little bit. What's something you've had to really learn through this?
Oh my God, dude. I mean, time management is the name of the game for me in my life right now. And probably a lot of people who are listening as well. I've got two young kids. I got a kindergartner and a third grader. I've got parents who are, getting up there in age and fortunately live in the same town. But, I'm either taking my kids to school or I'm taking my parents to a doctor's appointment, or I'm fixing something that's broken, in my house that's falling apart because I'm, too busy to keep it going, or I'm out rock climbing instead of doing the things that I should be doing. And then, there's this podcast. And the podcast isn't my full-time job. I pay the bills with a job, which I think a lot of people do, and then the podcast is a little bit of a passion, a side hustle, and maybe one day soon here, maybe this year, it will become my job, which is cool. I've put 2 years into it. I've got some sponsors. I've got like a really devoted Patreon community, and so I think I actually see a path to making the Struggle Climbing Show like the full-time gig, but right now it's not, and so yeah, man, I'm just like I'm hustling. I'm keeping the plates spinning. So I guess that would probably be one of the bigger struggles for me is just trying to be present with all of it. I've got these young kids, and if I was just down here in my podcast booth all the time, I would miss these incredible milestones that are happening with them. But if I was just messing around and climbing all the time, like maybe I'd like to, then I wouldn't be putting out high quality content, which I really pride myself on, like well edited, well structured, well researched episodes. So I'm just trying to juggle it all. And some days I'm doing better than others, man. I'd love to know how you do it too. Any tools that you've got to keep all the plates spinning would be very welcomed.
We can cut this, but what's your day job? What do you do?
Oh yeah, I can. Yeah, it's probably not going to be interesting, but I'm the co-founder of a food company. So like 10 years ago, I started a company called This Saves Lives.
Oh yeah, I knew that. That's the day job.
Yeah, exactly. So
I didn't know that was your day job. I almost thought that was almost another like thing you were involved in, but not the thing.
Yeah, I'm like head of growth for it. So I get out there, I take like high profile meetings, and whether it's like Starbucks or Kroger or whatever, like I'm out there, trying to get the product onto shelves and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's like, I ran it for a while as the CEO. It was way too much work, way too stressful, and then stepped back. In fact, stepped out for a while, started a forest kindergarten. This is like a tangent that we probably don't need to go into either. But when we moved to Kentucky, my son was in preschool. And like every time we went to preschool and it was raining, they kept him inside. And I was like, you guys got to get outside in the rain. Like kids need to be in the rain. And they said that it just was too messy for them. And my position was that was a janitorial issue, not an education issue, and that they should figure out how to just clean the kids up because being outside is where kids should be. And they wouldn't do it. So I took a year off and I studied and became certified as a forest kindergarten and forest preschool teacher and administrator. And I started what's now become the most successful forest school program in Kentucky. It's hundreds of kids have gone through it, and it's outdoor preschool for kids aged 3 to 6. And they're outside all day, every day in all weather. So February, 40 degrees, raining sideways outside. There's no walls. It's a school without walls. And so I started that, and I ran that as the director for 5 years.
Holy cow.
And then just handed it recently off to a new director, and I'm kind of part of it as an advisor, and now kind of hustle on the Struggle Climbing Show. So I don't know, man. I've got a sickness. I think you can probably tell. Like I'm a serial kind of like entrepreneur. I don't know. Like I'm just like always starting things and coming up with wild ideas and
What an amazing idea. And I'm looking at it right now. Is this the Thrive Forest School?
Thrive Forest School, yeah.
Wow.
That's it.
That's so cool, man. That is so neat. So you've got a lot of plate spinning. Yeah. How do you do it? Because that's a lot. That's probably more than me. I host 3 shows, worked for a fast growing startup. It's been nuts, and 2 kids, 1 on the way. So almost the same boat. And yeah, always working on my house. I was shoveling like a pile of rocks this morning, trying to spread them out in the garden. It's just like, I personally love having all the buckets. It does come to a head sometimes where I'm like, what the heck am I doing? But most of the time, I compare it to like a window with a lot of panes, and someone throws a rock at it and one of the panes busts. And I'm like, okay, I like that not all my windows are broken. One breaks. Because if I had one big window and it breaks, I'm kind of SOL till I get it fixed.
Right.
This is like, okay, one's broken, I can patch that real quick. All the others are fine. That's how I approach it. I like having the buckets that are all, if something's not going well, whether that be Athletic Bruin or the podcast just is in a lull, usually the other buckets can kind of help smooth that over and help me get out of that funk rather than just get stuck in a rut. Obviously having kids, it's like they can really pick you up out of stuff. They can also really do the opposite and bring you down when it's a struggle. But most of the time they're great, but that's what I like. I don't know. It seems like you like that too.
I like that analogy about the window panes and all of that. Yeah, I've just always, it's just such a personality thing. My college roommate, we're still best friends. He, studied accounting and has been in the same job since he graduated and will probably retire in a couple of years because he's done really well. And just like that's his personality. Like I couldn't wrap my head around that. I've never been comfortable being comfortable. I've just always wanted a higher level of risk and insecurity in my professional life as well as in my sporting life. Not in my personal life. I'm very happy that I found my wife and am very settled in that. That's a good place to be, not risky or insecure, at least for my personality. But if as soon as things get too comfortable for me, that's when I shift. So, as an actor, when I was just kind of punching in and hosting these shows, but wasn't getting a whole lot of fulfillment out of it, I shifted, walked away, started This Saves Lives. Became an entrepreneur, started a super fast growing consumer packaged goods company that had a give back element. We were helping to save lives around the world. We were, opening up really big accounts. That was super exciting. As soon as that started going really well, I kind of stepped back and said, well, I'll be on the board, but let's bring somebody else in to operate. I think it's time for something new. Then I started Thrive Forest School, Forest Preschool, outside, kids in the rain, 3-year-olds just in the rain all day in the snow, building fires to keep them warm. Totally crazy.
Dude, that's its own episode right there. Holy cow.
I'd love to do an episode on that. I mean, Forest School, I'm a bit of an expert on it now, having, created and built this program, and it is very special. And I had 2 kids go through that. But again, 5 years in, that's kind of, I always get the 5-year itch, my wife called it. 5 years in, became the most successful program in the region. And I'm so proud of it, but it no longer felt uncomfortable. And I seek that discomfort, right? I seek the struggle. And so the Struggle Climbing Show has become that. And I don't see this getting comfortable anytime soon because I'm hustling on all fronts. So yeah, I think it's like a personality thing. I'm just, I kind of really love being on the edge of will it or won't it, and then hustling really hard to make it. And again, whether that's professional or in sport, and I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to climbing or to other adventure sports, because you don't know. There's no guarantee. There's a level, and there's the kind of the higher probability or possibility, if you will, of failure. And I think that's what makes it engaging,
Wow. So you're a starter, but you're not necessarily that person that's meant to optimize something over the long term. You don't really geek out over, I could get 0.5% more engagement through this or that. You really want to let me get it 80%, hand it off to someone that is really excited about that last 20. But totally. The idea wouldn't exist without someone like you that's, say, can this even be possible? Like the idea of kids being out in all weather is just so mind blowing, but it's out there in the world now. So take me through that. How do you, I don't know, fight the fear of, you've built such an amazing thing with the Struggle climbing show. Is there an expiration date? You said not anytime soon, but there will come a point where you're like, okay, it's time to do something else. Does that make your community worried at all?
I don't think so. Where I've branched out in order to continue to keep my ratio of challenge and uncertainty higher is just into different areas of the show. So it started as a podcast because that's the lowest barrier to entry. You can do it in any closet with a phone and, a quick little editing program, and you can launch a show. And I love how low the barrier to entry is on podcasting. That also means there's a lot of garbage podcasts out there. So you have to wade through, some,
hey, that's the truth.
Separate the wheat from the chaff. But where I've gone from that, so, I started that because to try to prove the concept, hey, does this have legs? Will people care what I have to say about climbing? Will they care about the interviews that I have? Will I even get to talk to these people? And as soon as the answer, kind of was yes across the board, that they would care, it would be engaging, it would, be a well-produced show, and that the athletes would join it, then I started pushing myself outside of that. So about a year ago, I launched a YouTube channel that's been really fast growing. and we take clips from the podcast and we add some really engaging B-roll to it. But then I also shoot original content. So depending on when this interview comes out, probably a little bit later, it'll be kind of towards end of year 2024, I'll be rolling out a new YouTube series called Struggling With, where I spend a day with former guests of the show. So I've shot a few of these already. I shot one with Alex Honnold, who we've talked about in this episode, of course, and is quite a famous rock climber, but I've shot a handful of others with other famous rock climbers. And I'll spend a day with them. And it's kind of one part comedians in cars getting coffee and one part like Red Bull adventure show. It's a little bit about the moments between the moments in getting to see these athletes as the humans that they are when they aren't out there doing the most impressive physical feats in sports. So we're goofing around. Alex and I were, throwing donuts in each other's mouth to try to carb up before having a big hike to go up and go rock climbing. Then he challenged me to like this backflip contest on a 200-foot rope swing. But then I challenged him to an ice plunge because he hates water and he hates cold water. And so there's like these really funny, goofy moments. But then interjected is like some of the sickest rock climbing you've ever seen, because it's Alex or it's, some of the others that I've done the show with. So I know there's a long-winded way of saying kind of how am I going to keep things interesting with the struggle. I love the podcast. The conversations that I have are so engaging and I'm so inspired by them and it's growing really fast. So that's the foundation of this, whole mini little empire, if you will. But from there, from the podcast is springing all these other opportunities to get back to my video production roots, which I did for so long out in Los Angeles, behind the camera as well as in front of the camera. And then beyond, I'm working on some experiences and some live events and things at climbing festivals. So yeah, I'm really hyped on climbing, on the climbing community and just what stories we're able to tell with the struggle. And yeah, we'll see where it goes, but I don't think there's, any end in sight. And I guess if it gets too comfortable, I'll just launch the struggle mountain biking show or something.
The struggle has no bounds. I mean, it knows no bounds. It can be anything. You can struggle with anything.
Totally. Yeah, we're struggling. And what I ask every guest when they come on, the first question I ask every guest, and I'd love to ask you as well, Mason, because I know we're probably about to wrap up, but I'm not going to let you off the hook, is what does struggle mean to you as an athlete? What's your relationship with struggle?
Oh gosh, interviewing me. I knew you couldn't. I couldn't keep you on that side of the mic too long. Man, I don't even know what struggle to me. Yeah, it's like that necessary friction. I was talking about pressure this morning with car tires or vehicle tires, and I said, a vehicle's most efficient at a certain pressure. And I feel like humans are most efficient at a certain pressure. If you're under pressurized, it's like riding a bike with a fairly flat tire. Yes, you can, but it could be such more of an enjoyable experience with the right pressure, usually higher. Very rarely are we in situations where we're over pressurized out in the real world. Yes, that does happen, but more often we're under pressurized. So I think the struggle is finding that right PSI for your life. To just keep you rolling. I need pressure to get done, basically. If I'm under pressurized, I'm doom scrolling too much. I'm wasting time. I'm not, I'm a little bit lost, and I need pressure in life. So I ask my wife, I ask my coworkers, I ask people to say, put those expectations on me, put those deadlines on me, because that's the only way me and my personality are going to get it done. So I think that's what it is for me.
Yeah, dude, I love that. Man, you are like the king of metaphors too. You've been dropping some great metaphors this whole time. That's really beautiful, dude. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't often get asked questions. I try to avoid it. I don't try to talk too much. Like a lot of the talking I'm doing, I'll actually cut out and just kind of have mostly your answers. But let me ask you this, with all that you have going on and the way your brain works, what are some budding interests or budding curiosities that you think are kind of on the horizon for you? It might be too early, but just with the way you think.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, my gears are always turning for kind of like, what's the thing? What's the next spark? One of the things this is not a direct answer to your question. In fact, it's almost an antidote to that question, because I have such a tendency to constantly be trying to create. I've actually had to find ways to put structures into my life to quiet that so that I can be more focused with my family or with the things that I've already created. So, one of the things that I had my wife do is probably 2 months ago now. I had her set a screen limit on my devices on my phone, like as if I were, like we do for my son, for so he's not on Minecraft 10 hours a day. And I don't know the code. It was really hard for like the first few days, maybe the first week or two. But at 6 p.m., which is when we, typically sit down for dinner, uh, I'm locked out of all non-essential things. Like I can text, but I'm locked out of my email. I'm locked out of Instagram. I'm locked out of my editing platforms. Now, if I'm on a deadline and sometimes I have to work into the wee hours or whatever, it's like so embarrassing, but I have to go to her. I'll be like, hey, Kara, can you give me some more time? I got to edit this thing. But, as like silly as that sounds, it's been so liberating because when the option to work exists for me, I I work because I do get a lot of pleasure from it. Like I'm really passionate about the work that I do. Maybe if it were I was just like, doing accounting for a widget company or something like that, I wouldn't. But I'm creating these shows, I'm telling these stories, I'm talking to these incredible athletes. So
Yeah,
if
you're helping solve child hunger, through this saves lives. I mean, there's everything has purpose.
yeah, exactly. And like so yeah, I get it fills my cup, but it also distracts me and it's also pretty exhausting mentally and I don't think in the long run super healthy. So, rather than if my kid's in the bath, kind of turn away and hit refresh on my email to see if a new thing has come in from the athlete that I reached out to or whatever, I just don't have the option. And in not having the option, it has completely liberated me from that like little nag, that little like the little thing where you check your pocket to see if your phone buzzed, that kind of thing. And it's really helped me to be more present, which is nice. I'm probably not as productive as I was when I was 25 and could just work, 20 hours a day and this kind of thing. But that's not the phase of life that I'm in. I think I'm attained a high enough level of experience and expertise in the things that I'm uniquely good at that I can do pretty good damage during the working hours and unplug and be present and probably not miss out for it. So sorry, that probably didn't answer your question there, but at least it's something that I'm doing to try to
No, that's
quiet
okay. That's
that
okay.
mind.
No, I'm just kidding. You answered my question. Last question, and then we'll go. And is have you been starstruck by anyone? Any guests with the climbing, the struggle climbing show?
Yeah, way more so than when, and I still act like I'm actually going to be heading out to LA in about a week to do a TV show. So like every once in a while, I still have like a tiny foot in that world because it's so fun, and I've still got a lot of friends in it. So I go out and do that every once in a while. But even like in my heyday of acting, when I was doing, big productions and working with like, movie stars and recording artists and all this stuff, I was I'm far more starstruck now hosting the struggle climbing show when I'm talking to some of my rock climbing heroes. So just recently, I interviewed Adam Andra, who is the greatest rock climber of all time, the greatest sport climber, at least. And I was, pretty psyched about that. He's climbed the hardest grade in the world and has just been absolutely revolutionary. Um, and so like talking with him, Lynn Hill, I already mentioned earlier in this interview, it was the worst interview I've ever done, no doubt,
That's how
because
it goes.
oh my God, I was fumbling, dude. I was just like I couldn't handle myself. I was like, oh my God, I'm talking to Lynn Hill. She's been so like transformative and revolutionary and such an icon of our sport for so long. I like couldn't get it together. I mean, it's really a bad interview to be perfectly honest. I mean, she was a pro and she gave incredible answers, but she really carried me through it because I was so starstruck. Um, and then yeah, the other one that comes to mind is just like spending that day with Alex. And Alex has become a bit of a friend now, which is really cool when your heroes become your mentors, become your friends. It's like such an interesting process. And getting out there and being able to climb with him for a day and doing the ice plunge and the backflips and then just rock climbing. Like, I belayed him on his project while he belayed me on mine. So I was climbing and he was helping me through mine, and then he was climbing on his. And he's obviously a world-class rock climber. I'm not. I'm a weekend warrior, average climber. But like I recall this moment where he got up and he hung on the rope, and he called down and he said, "Hey, Ryan, what do you think I should do here?" And it like hit me where I was like, wow, one of the most accomplished rock climbers in the world is like genuinely asking me for my opinion. And that's just how cool the sport is. Nobody's above anybody. We can all contribute regardless of whatever level we climb at. Obviously I couldn't climb the route that he was on, but I could have a perspective. I could have an opinion, and he wanted it. And I just thought that was so cool. So yeah, man, it's been a really interesting journey here on The Struggle. And I think a lot of that comes through on the episodes, whether you're brand new to rock climbing or you've been doing it for a long time. I hope it comes through. I hope people enjoy the interviews that I'm doing.
Well, Ryan, thank you. Yeah, thank you for just providing a platform to learn more, because we are very surface level with the sport. It's really the Adventure Story podcast. Like, what's the best stories you have? And
yeah,
someone like you is really teaching tangible skills and how-tos, and so allowing people to dive deeper into what they love. So thank you for focusing on that, at least for now. And do you ever have any of the climbers go, "Ryan Devlin from Cougar Town," or "Are you the one? Is that you?"
Dude, 100%.
Oh, really?
There's
That's
a couple.
awesome.
Yeah, like it's so funny. I mean,
They're
not
sure
in any
tricked by
sort
you.
of like way, but yeah, there's a couple climbers that I've talked to that were like really big fans of some of the shows that I did, and kind of wanted to talk about that for a while. So
Wow.
like I ended up having to edit it out because I'm not going to like use the Struggle Climbing Show to talk about, stories about when I was on set of whatever show. But it was funny. Like when worlds collide like that, it is kind of funny.
That's awesome. Well, Ryan, I got to ask, where should people find you? I'll point them obviously to the podcast. I'll point them to I'll even include the Forest School, This Saves Lives, anything you want. In addition to those, is there somewhere you want folks to go?
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I do have a personal Instagram, which is Ryan Devlin Outside, but I'm almost never on it. So really the best way to see what I'm up to and also to get in touch with me, if you want to get in touch with me, is at the Struggle Climbing Show Instagram, as well as YouTube. And then of course the struggleclimbingshow.com, where you can, whether it's Spotify or Apple or whatever, you can link to whatever podcast player you use. And yeah, and I'm like super responsive if people reach out. You can hit me up usually through Instagram. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
I love that, and you were so right about climbing being a very accessible sport. Still, it's you can meet your heroes, and you're proving that. That's awesome. So, wow, we should have done this years ago. This is great.
Well, thank you so much, man.
Yeah.
I love what you're doing over here. I love the stories that you're able to tell and the perspective that you bring. You ask really thoughtful questions and bring on such cool and interesting guests. I'm always hyped up after listening to your show, and it's a real treat to be on it. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ryan. It's a struggle,
Look at that. That's why you get paid the medium bucks. There's no podcaster that's making the big bucks. Well, I don't know. There's a couple.
I'm no Joe Rogan.
There's Huberman, there's Rogan, and then there's the rest of us.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe Ira Glass. That's about it. So, all right, see you. Bye.
See you, buddy.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to grow in the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.